you've had depression, but now you're claiming on anxiety, they group it all together.
Yeah, much harder to get that data when it's not a structural issue. Absolutely. The other situation that can happen is you could potentially be declined for postpartum depression or anxiety. It's not as common. The reasons that could lead to a decline would be probably if it's recent and there has been hospitalisation due to mental health or suicidal ideation. Again, same with any mental health condition. They're the kind of flags for insurers to be a bit more strict on their assessment. If you've experienced this in the past, just have a chat to your advisor. Every case is different. We can have a look at what the insurers would assess. Some can be more generous than others.
Hey there, we are going to do another deep dive episode on women's health considerations when it comes to personal insurance. So again, with me, we've got Azaria Bell.
Thanks for having me back.
So before we get started, one thing is we are going to be talking about these insurances, what they are, how they work, but our first episode, we've gone into a bit of a deep dive into some of the jargon we've talked about and the actual insurance policy. So definitely watch that first. But in this episode, we're going to be talking about postpartum depression and anxiety. Going to be talking about pregnancy complications, low iron, and PCOS.
Yes.
So let's kick us off. Talk about postpartum depression and anxiety.
Yes. So these are two somewhat common mental health conditions that we see for our new mums at Skye, and it can have an impact on your insurance. So in essence, postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, pretty common mental health conditions that occur after childbirth. It can involve low moods, feelings of panic and all of that kind of thing. It affects around 1 in 7 women in Australia. The depression and the anxiety affects 1 in 5 women, and often they do coexist. So when I'm talking about this, I'm kind of talking about them interchangeably for the impact on insurance. But just as an example of how it can impact things, so for example, if we have a client who has a history of mild postpartum depression, it was a single episode, eventually kind of resolved itself, no hospitalisation or anything like that, no ongoing treatment, possible standard terms for that one, so no exclusions or loadings. If that happened quite recently, so if it was under 12 months ago that person was experiencing those symptoms, it is likely that we'd be looking at a mental health exclusion on probably TPD and income protection cover. But often what the underwriters will do is they know that was probably more just linked to that period of life. So after a while, they might be willing to review that exclusion and remove it down the line.
Yeah, and there are some considerations. If someone has a history of a mental health condition in the past, pre-babies or in between, then that may have an impact on the assessment from an insurer's point of view as well.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. In terms of what might get a mental health exclusion, so moderate to severe kind of symptoms, if they're receiving ongoing treatment, whether that's therapy or medication, counselling and things like that, insurers with any kind of mental health condition, if you're still receiving some kind of treatment, they usually will exclude that condition. So, someone might feel quite a lot better. Maybe they're not feeling that anxiety on a daily basis, but they're still seeing a therapist. That might just be for your general kind of mental health maintenance or improvement. But in the eyes of an insurance company, as you know, Phil, they are quite strict on that kind of thing.
And talk to me about anxiety and depression. So they're very different in terms of their symptoms and the experience that people have with those two kind of symptoms. Are they the same when it comes to the insurers? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, more or less. It can even be more specific than that. So depression, anxiety, that can be a diagnosis. It can be more like of a feeling that you've had. Even things like high levels of stress can lead to a mental health exclusion. So I don't want anyone to feel that they've received an unfair outcome if they feel, anxiety, but they haven't been diagnosed. It's kind of just how it works with insurance at the moment. The reason being is insurers pay out millions of dollars per year in mental health claims. It's a huge reason for claims. So it is something that they're a lot more cautious of.
Yeah. And one of the things about mental health when it comes to someone may say, oh, I've got depression and only depression, can that be excluded? But when it comes to insurance, from a mental health point of view, it's really hard for a clinician to diagnose or understand that, okay, someone had depression, but they may need a claim on anxiety and it's not linked at all to depression. That's a really hard, thing from a clinician's point of view. And so it's like, if I have a sore knee, it may impact my hips and the way I walk, but it's much more clearly defined. I may get a knee exclusion because I've got a sore knee prior to the application. And then if I bust my knee or I need to take time off work because of my knee, it's much easier to isolate that need for that claim from an insurer's point of view at claim time. But mental health, it's all kind of grouped together saying, hey, all mental health is the same from an insurer's point of view, because it is difficult for them to say you've had depression, but now you're claiming on anxiety. They group it all together.
Yeah, much harder to get that data when it's not a structural issue. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other situation that can happen is you could potentially be declined for postpartum depression or anxiety. It's not as common. The reasons that could lead to a decline would be probably if it's recent and there has been hospitalisation due to mental health or suicidal ideation. Again, same with any mental health condition. They're the kind of flags for insurers to be a bit more strict on their assessment.
Yeah.
So again, just if you've experienced this in the past, just have a chat to your advisor. Every case is different. We can have a look at what the insurers would assess. Some can be more generous than others.
And the other thing, when it comes to insurance and underwriting, this is probably, we could communicate this better at Skye, is the goalposts are always changing. Like, probably a year ago, there was an insurance company that was very flexible when it came to mental health.
Yeah.
So all of our clients who had mental health symptoms, we weren't getting exclusions with this insurer. Since then, they've tightened up their kind of restrictions and gone, the same symptoms a year ago would have gotten covered. Today, it's not. Or it'll get excluded from a policy. So the goalposts are always moving, and that's why we do spend a lot of time up front getting as much information, sending it to all insurers, because, we don't know if one insurer is going to be more lenient next month. And so if someone has been declined, what is the process normally?
Yeah, so decline's not the end of the world. It's not like, with your money, if you go bankrupt, you've got that mark on your record. It essentially just means that perhaps right now you can't get that type of insurance. Maybe they've just declined you for a couple of covers and you can get a couple of others. But yeah, it essentially just means that if you are to apply for insurance again in the future with either that company or with a different company, there'll be a question on the application, have you been declined for insurance in the past? You just say yes. They're not trying to rule you out. They just want to know why that happened so that they can make sure that they're getting the same full understanding of your medical situation that the other insurer did.
All right, next question that's left of field, we haven't prepped for, but if I get declined, if I go through Skye and I go to an insurance company and get declined because I've disclosed mental health, can I just apply with another insurance company and just not tell them?
Technically, you could do that. I would strongly recommend against it. What you'd know, if you've been through an insurance application, you're going to know that you are required to disclose a lot of medical information, and there is a duty to take reasonable care to disclose what you know to be true about your medical history. It can come back to bite you if you were to leave something like that off and in the future you were to claim on mental health, for example, and the insurer, as a part of their claims assessment, accesses your records and says, actually, hang on, you were having these symptoms 10 years ago and you didn't disclose that on your insurance application. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, the insurer does have the ability to refuse that claim.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's a non-disclosure. Yeah. And so basically our rule is we'll never help any client do that because we don't want to be in the middle of any insurance fraud or issues. So we basically say, hey, we will help you when we think we can get the cover with the same disclosures, and we're not going to hide any information. Not because we want to be harsh or mean or anything. We just want to make sure that our clients have certainty at claim time and not disclosing something, especially when it comes to mental health, when claims are pretty significant in terms of the overall percentage of claims insurance companies are spending out on mental health. Not disclosing that when you have sought medical treatment and it's on your medical record and it's quite easy to access, not access, no one can access it without authority, but through the claims process, they will ask for those medical records. We're just going to get declined the claim, and you've been paying premiums that you're not going to get anything on. And in fact, they can then potentially cancel your policy as well. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why we don't recommend it, but basically have a chat to the advisor and just say, hey, how long do you think I need to wait? Because we'll get a good sense from the underwriter once we've gone through the application to go, actually, it's probably 12 months away. It may be 5 years away. It could be 10 years away from whatever it was. So there's a spectrum. Things like suicidal ideation will mean that we need to be further away from, the the suicidal ideation
Yeah.
before we can apply for cover. Things like, more mild symptoms, but it's happened recently, then it may be 12 months away.
Exactly. And I don't want any of this to scare anyone or make you feel like there's no point in trying to get insurance and trying to figure it out yourself. Still just chat to an advisor, because even if worst case scenario, you're not able to get the cover right now, we can at least give you an idea of when you would be able to and help set that expectation.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's move on to pregnancy complications. I can talk. Maybe. Most of the time I can, but yeah, let's go.
Yeah. Perfect. So that is a question that we get. Can you claim on, let's say, your income protection for pregnancy? So one clause that you'll see in most of the insurance companies' product disclosure statements is that a claim will not be paid if the claim arises from normal and uncomplicated pregnancy. So just general, not feeling very well, things like that. You're normally not claiming.
And you need to take time off work when you have a baby.
Yes.
And so that's not a claimable event, that time off work. Even though it is a medical event that's caused you not to work,
Yep.
having babies doesn't, allow you to claim on income protection.
Yeah. If you've already got income protection, though, that's good. If something were to happen while you were on leave, for example, you can still be covered under your income protection. But yeah, you can't claim for being pregnant, unfortunately. Yep. But we do still get the question. So there are pregnancy complications that are not, normal, and they are part of a complicated pregnancy. So it doesn't technically meet that definition. So I'll go through a few things that that might be considered. So miscarriage, generally not covered, unfortunately. There is an insurance company that has what's called a female critical illness benefit. Critical illness meaning trauma insurance. They have an added section in there where they cover a bit more than what most insurance do when it comes to women's kind of health considerations. So, for example, under pregnancy complications, things that are covered include stillbirth, ectopic pregnancy, eclampsia. Am I saying that correct? Of pregnancy. So that's the high blood pressure, I believe.
Hey, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing it to me. One thing we did mention in the last video is we're not doctors.
We're not doctors.
We read PDSs all day, every day, but we're not doctors.
Yeah, I read these things, but I don't say them out loud very often or hear them said.
That's right. So, and we get them emailed to us and we can fact check it.
Exactly. So there are a few pregnancy complications that can be covered under that benefit. It's not your full trauma benefit. So if you've got, $200,000 of trauma, you're not getting paid the whole amount. It's usually a maximum of about 20% of that benefit. But that's still good. There are some things that can be covered, and also congenital abnormalities as well. So things that might happen to your child, that can often be insured as well. Now that's, again, not very common. Just one of the insurers have that benefit, but something worth looking at.
Yeah. The other thing is when we have these covers, like we don't expect our clients to read the PDSs back to front. I mean, we tell them they should because they're signing up to a product, but no one does. There are some things that are so there's like a list of these things that are claimable, but then deep in the PDS, it'll have clear definitions of exactly what is required. So one of the things that is an ectopic pregnancy, and then in brackets occurring in the fallopian tubes. Yeah. And so deep in the PDS, it'll have the exact kind of condition that needs to be met to then access a claim for that. So it is one of these things. Sometimes if something happens, it may look like, okay, this is not a claimable event, or it may look like it is, but then when you read the fine print, you've got to meet certain conditions. So again, we're not doctors, we don't know this, but it is important if someone's experiencing these things to then maybe even reach out to us. We can show you whereabouts in the PDS it is, or your advisor that you're working with, and then take that to your GP or take that to your specialist and say, hey, this is what's required under my insurance contract. Does what's happening to me meet this or not? Just so you can get a bit of certainty that your doctor will read it. They'll know exactly what's going on if you do or you don't. And then if you do, then we'll start working, filling out claims forms.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the other thing, there are a couple of other things in terms of pregnancy complications that I was going to talk about as well. First one being gestational diabetes. Again, another really common one that we see. It's just essentially, diabetes that's pretty specific to when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
So this generally doesn't have a big impact on insurance applications. If you're currently pregnant and you're going through this, then you might find that the insurers would place a 50% loading or thereabouts, so they might charge you a little bit more.
Yep.
But once you've given birth and things have returned to normal, often they'll take that one off. If you've had gestational diabetes in the past and you're no longer experiencing that, Yeah, usually
no
standard
issues.
rates. No issues at all. Similar thing with preeclampsia as well. Hope I'm saying that right. That is the case where you have heightened blood pressure during pregnancy, I believe. Again, if that returns to normal after giving birth, which I think it pretty much always does, then that should be fine. No impact on your insurance application. If it's very recent, perhaps the insurers will request a blood test, which they'll usually cover at their cost.
Yep.
But no, we haven't had many issues with clients.
All right, next topic. We are going to PCOS. What is it?
Yes, I like that you handed that off to me to pronounce.
That's why I asked the question.
Yep. So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome, or ovary syndrome. I may be wrong on that one. But again, this one is a hormonal issue. It can cause a wide variety of symptoms, but primarily impacting your periods, and it causes cysts around the ovary. Generally, this is diagnosed with a blood test. In terms of how common it is, about 8 to 13% of women in Australia will experience PCOS. An impact on insurance. This one is a hard one to answer because it does vary quite a lot from woman to woman. So often it's associated with other factors. PCOS can be associated with things like cardiovascular risks, high cholesterol, BMI, thyroid dysfunction. So it's often not just the PCOS that the insurer is assessing. They're assessing everything else that could be a part of that as well. In terms of what we've seen with our clients, we've got clients who have PCOS and they get standard rates, so no exclusions, no loadings. An example of that, an insurer said to one of our clients recently, this is subject to the client having normal thyroid function and the client does not have any cardiovascular risk associated with the PCOS. If that's the case, and it's pretty simple, it's probably going to be fine. Probably the worst I've seen is really just a loading. So 50% loading, for example, you might pay a bit more for that if it's kind of impacting your life.
Yeah, and again, as one of these things that I think we talked about in the last video, these comorbidity issues. So it's in and of itself not an issue, but if it has other impacts on your overall health, then they group it all together and say, hey, this is a risk factor that on its own all good, but with this and this, all right, we'll put a loading on.
Yeah.
And again, PCOS is one of those things they can't. If there are comorbidity concerns from an insurer's point of view, they can't just say, okay, we're going to exclude this one thing because it may lead to, as you said, cardiovascular concerns, thyroid concerns, there's a few other things that have an impact on it.
Yeah, exactly. So they might say, not that they're excluding it, but if they were to exclude it, they might exclude PCOS and associated factors, but that can be really hard to do. So that's why they usually, for PCOS, will just place a loading like, hey, okay, there's a number of different potential risks here. Let's just charge a little bit more because it's really hard to exclude everything that could be associated with that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, next topic. We're talking about low iron.
Low iron, yeah. So this one is for my fellow low iron girlies. Low iron is not specific to women, but we do tend to have it more often. For obvious reasons, we lose more blood. Pregnancy can be quite taxing in terms of iron stores. So yeah, very common. I'm in part of that group. You might feel dizziness, you might feel fatigue, you might stand up too quickly and feel like you're going to fall over. Again, super, super common. In terms of impact on insurance, I haven't really seen it have any major impact for any of my clients. With things like low iron, it can be usually fixed quite easily. So it could just be that you're taking supplements. You could have an infusion. That's what I did. I felt like $1 million the next day. So highly recommend talking to your doctor about that.
Yeah. I don't recommend because we're not doctors,
yes,
remember.
Exactly.
But recommend you talk to your doctor.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that's part of the reason why it hasn't been a huge issue is mostly it can be treated quite quickly. It can be an issue if you are severely anemic, for example. So if you've got persistently low iron and it's not responding to treatment, that could be potentially a sign of something else, and that could potentially lead to a decline. So insurers will generally ask for a blood test at application stage that they'll cover. And if you're having real trouble getting your iron up, the insurers might not be sure of what's going on there. And you've got an example of that, Phil, with a past claim.
Yeah, so I'll talk more generally about this in terms of back to the whole purpose of insurance is once it's in place, you don't need to be proactive about your health at all. So if you are getting regular infusions and it's working, and once you've got insurance in place, you don't have to do that. If you decide, and most people won't do this, but if you decide, actually, I don't want to, we've got a team member who jokingly says, I'm not going to put sunscreen on because I got insurance for that. Now, he's joking. thankfully, ish. But it's one of these things that once you've got the insurance, once you got the cover, you actually don't need to be proactive at all. And so that's why insurers can be more conservative, a lot more conservative up front. Yeah. But in terms of generally blood tests, we had a client who had gone through the application process, had blood tests for a while, and then got a blood test through the process, and he had high white blood cell counts. And that wasn't an indicator of anything, like there was no reason for it, but it's an indicator of something more severe happening. And so the insurance company declined that application, and they said, hey, high white blood cell counts, we don't know why it is that the case, but we're not going to offer that increase of cover. And this client did go on to have pancreatic cancer and did go on to pass away, 18 months after we applied for the cover. Fortunately, he's a good friend of ours, so fortunately he had insurance. He had good insurance in place. We were just increasing it. Not because we knew anything about it. He would have sorted it out much sooner if he did know. But he was just going through the process, of increasing the cover and just changing things around. So fortunately he had cover. He was paid out for trauma, income protection, and eventually his wife was paid out the life insurance. But that's why some of these markers that insurers see on blood tests, they just say, oh, maybe let's just put the thing on hold, or we'd want to see, a change over time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Low iron, again, usually fine, but have a chat to your advisor again. We can look into that, but usually not an impact.
I think one of my big takeaways from this chat is really it's and I say this kind of jokingly, we're all special butterflies.
Yes.
And it's just so like we keep on saying, it depends on this, depends on this, depends on this. There's comorbidity issues, It's so, and that's kind of our job as advisors is we look at everyone as an individual and a human being, but they're a puzzle.
Yes.
From a health point of view. Well, how do these puzzle pieces, how do these symptom over here, diagnosis over here, how does that all fit together from an insurance application point of view? And how are we getting people covered? And so it's really important to make sure people are going through this process with an advisor who's asking a lot of health questions, because that's the biggest determining factor of which insurer we want to go with in our view. It's really important because, as we said before, the goalposts are moving. We had an insurer who was very fast and loose when it came to mental health, and great from a client's point of view. We were able to get cover when everyone else was putting exclusions on or suggesting exclusions. This insurer wasn't. And so it's important to work with an advisor to understand your individual health history and disclose it all and just be upfront about it. Don't try and hide some facts or underrepresent some facts. Just tell it as it is, or as you believe it to be, because sometimes medical records will say one thing, and so be upfront before going through the application process, because it really does depend. All of these things, if anyone's experienced it in the past or have family history in the past, it all impacts the insurer we go with. That's kind of my big takeaway from this chat. Exactly, yeah. And we're not being vague on purpose. There is just so many different factors to consider. So it's very individual. Yeah. Awesome. Anything else from yourself? No, I think that's all. I would just say, reach out, have a chat. These things can be really difficult to talk about. Talking about sensitive medical information can be really tough, but all our advisors were very respectful. We treat your information with privacy, and there's absolutely no judgment at all. So reach out. We deal with this stuff every day. Every day, so every day. If someone has a really a medical concern that they're worried about, no one in their family know about. We see this all the time. Yeah, exactly. We see all the funky stuff. Nothing can shock us. And we're very pragmatic. At the end of the day, we're here to help our clients get insurance, and so we capture the information, we give it to the insurers, we de-identify the client's information, and then just give them an outcome and say, hey, we're not the deciding factor, but here is the likely outcome for yourself, and do you want to go ahead with the cover? Exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thanks so much for having me, Phil. And I hope everyone enjoyed watching this deep dive.